Hi, I'm Karen Ripley, and I invite you to join me on a recent, unexpected side trip to Brittany, France, during the 80th anniversary of the city of Plélo's remarkable liberation celebration, and learn why Bretons and Americans remember and honor our shared DNA of World War II. A last-minute decision to deliver my father's World War II documents to the city of Plélo, France, opened me up to an amazing experience that has truly changed my life. I ask that you join me so that you too can know and appreciate how we Americans are respected and revered because our ancestors fought to liberate the town of Plélo in August 1944. As Burt and I got closer and closer to Plélo, I began reading the war documents I hoped to deliver. I was staggered at what I read. I began to realize that there could be far more to this experience than just delivering World War II military documents and satisfying my curiosity about my dad's services as a liberator in Plélo, France. I hoped with all my heart that Plélo still existed. I saw it on the GPS, but had no idea if there was a mayor or a mayor's office. How much had things changed since the war? I was anxious to arrive and to get in touch with my father's war experience. I needed to come to terms with what my father and all the other liberators had experienced in World War II. I was humbled and overwhelmed with respect and gratitude as I began to read the historical accounts of what had happened when Lieutenant Hamsley led 5 tanks and 20 men of Patton's 3rd Army, 15th Cavalry Reconnaissance Troop, into battle to liberate the city of Plélo in Brittany, France on August 7, 1944. I began to understand my country, my father, and myself. As we drove through the gorgeous Brittany countryside filled with colorful flowers under bright blue skies, I asked myself, was Daddy here? Was it this beautiful when he and the other men drove their tanks toward Plélo? It was the same time of year. Were cows up to their knees munching green grass? Were chickens pecking in the barnyards? Were hawks gliding in the sky? Did Daddy hear the birds chirping in the trees? Or did he hear distant artillery? How did he and the other troopers keep driving forward? What was their motivation? How could they survive this incredible beauty in the face of impending doom? As I scanned the numerous official documents and unofficial accounts by American and Allied soldiers, I began to become aware of how unbelievable it was that men and women bravely marched off to war and near certain death to preserve democracy and freedom for all. They didn't fight a single battle. They fought for years, each and every day, with no end in sight. As we approached Plélo, I thought about the villagers whose very lives were at stake that August day. The Germans were literally lining them up for execution in front of the church across from the Resistance House. Did the people standing there waiting to die hear the rumbling of the 5 American tanks as they raced down the narrow road around the bend and into the square? Little did I know that I would soon be meeting the descendants of those whose very lives were literally saved by the arrival of Lieutenant Hamsley and the 15th Cavalry Reconnaissance Troop B. In July 1944, Patton's 3rd Army, 15th Cavalry Reconnaissance Troop B, landed in Brittany, France. As part of Task Force A, their job was to clear out the Germans and Russians who were holding the Brittany Peninsula with its English Channel ports, and to destroy their heavy artillery, thus securing the Allied advance to Berlin. By August 1944, Brittany and its citizens knew of the Allied advance and prayed that they would be freed from the occupation that they had endured for over 4 years.
So after the liberation of Plélo, it really fits into the breakthrough, the Allied breakthrough, Operation Cobra around Avranches. So here we are on July 31st, 1944. And there's a sudden acceleration. So all these troops that couldn't get out of Normandy, or at least were stuck in Normandy, will suddenly flood into Brittany. So part of the American troops, or at least the Allied troops, are somewhat stuck around St. Malo and Dinant. And so they decided to send a task force, Task Force A, to rush and try to get to Brest as quickly as possible. And that's where the story of Plélo fits in this extremely complicated situation between Dinant and Brest. And all these Allied troops arriving, the resistance therefore intensifies its sabotage activities to paralyze or hinder the movement of German convoys. And then on the other side, there are the German troops themselves, who were initially ordered to join the Dinant sector to block the arrival of the Allies. And finally, there's a counter-order that arrives while they're already struggling to advance towards Verdun. A counter-order instructs them to retreat to Morlaix and then Brest. So, it's a complete mess, really. We have German troops going in all sorts of directions. And one of the gathering points for the German troops was to regroup at Château-Laudren, actually. So there was a gathering of German troops at Château-Laudren on August 4th and 5th, 1944. The residents saw them heading back towards Saint-Brieuc, so this was on August 6th. Ultimately, they don't make it because they are stuck in Saint-Brieuc. The Allies have already arrived. The resistance already controls the city. So we have these German troops, which are largely made up of auxiliary troops recruited from Eastern Europe. There are many Georgians, Ukrainians, what are called White Russians, but that's not the correct term. These are units of the German army. Composed of auxiliary troops, we'll call them auxiliary troops. It's a bit like the Harkis in France during the Algerian War. These are troops recruited in occupied territories, and these troops consequently retreat again towards Château-Laudren and Plélo. So it's the evening of August 6th, and the issue is that in Plélo there are resistance fighters arriving from Ploé, who are going to arrive right in the center of Plélo, just as these German troops are returning to Château-Laudren Plélo. And then, they're not ready at all. They all jump out of the truck, with the truck. They try to shoot at the German soldiers. But honestly, they're not really in a position of superiority. They retreat in a hurry, manage to reach and warn their comrades who stayed further back that there's a problem. And that's when Colonel Hamsley arrives, completely by chance, actually, as part of the reconnaissance units, the cavalry unit, that arrived in Plélo. We don't necessarily know if that was the objective, but in any case, he arrived at Plélo, and he is going to join the resistance fighters who are returning to Plélo to, resolve the situation. And they will arrive, it's the morning of August 7th, just as hostages are at risk of being executed, at a moment when there's a real fear of a massacre in Plélo. Well, there are these 5 tanks that are going to arrive, which in a few minutes will... So it's very violent, but it's very brief. It's really a cavalry charge with 5 tanks supported by the resistance fighters from Plélo, acting as infantry, and the German soldiers are quickly torn apart. So that's the liberation of Plélo. We came close to a catastrophe, but for the population, we went from, the kind of emotion from panic and anxiety to liberation and extreme joy in just a few minutes, really. It's the emotional roller coaster, that's really it, about the liberation of Plélo. So on August 7th, Plélo is, liberated. People are a bit afraid of a return of German troops, but there won't be any, actually. And the Allies are moving through Château-Laudren. So basically, the liberation is really confirmed, at least for Plélo.
Plélo's citizens and the French resistance worked tirelessly to assist in any way they could to help the Allies succeed in winning Plélo's liberation. The pressure exerted on the Bretons was increased as the Germans began to fall back. The occupiers were angry and revengeful and made sure that the townspeople suffered. Gruesome acts of revenge and hate were perpetrated on the surrounding towns as the Allies advanced and the Germans and Russians fell back. A neighboring town was decimated when its citizens were herded into their church, which was set afire, killing everyone. The neighboring town of Château-Laudren lost several members of their fire department, who had rushed to put out a house fire only to be picked off by German snipers as they tried to save a home and family. My father, Delbert Downing, served with the 15th Cavalry. They landed toward Brest with 5 Sherman tanks and 20 men. Hamsley had orders to proceed to Brest, Brittany, when he was approached by a group of resistance fighters. They asked Lieutenant Hamsley to go against his orders and join them in saving the village of Plélo, a few kilometers down the road. Hamsley was initially hesitant, not wanting to go against orders, but upon seeing the desperation of the Free French, he decided to help them. As was reported in the Winter Park, Florida Outlook on December 14, 1989, quote, on August 7, 1944, the enemy was lining up a mother and daughter for execution and had set in motion the necessary artillery and manpower for the imminent destruction of the entire parish of Plélo. Lieutenant Hamsley's platoon quickly overcame the Germans' fierce anti-tank guns and proceeded to disarm the enemy, taking 50 prisoners and leaving 60 dead in their wake. Lieutenant Hamsley himself was in charge of the mission, and after being informed of the situation is quoted as having said, "I'll take care of it, then I'll go on to Brest." And that he did. The Germans were caught totally unaware and in reverie. Not one American soldier was taken prisoner, nor were there any American casualties on that hot August day in Brittany. Unquote. My unplanned trip to Plélo, France, introduced me to the trauma of World War II, not only through my father's experience, but also of the extended trauma of the community of Plélo, who had suffered the full brunt of World War II during 4 years of occupation. Americans know and respect the Normandy cemeteries that honor our fallen heroes in World War II. However, most Americans do not realize the extent to which we Americans are still honored as one of the allies who freed Europe and saved democracy. I feel it's our duty to remind ourselves of the price already paid and the debt that's due by each American to remember and honor World War II for the momentous and hard-earned victory our ancestors waged for democracy. Join me for the next episode of You Were There, Karen Bev, and learn why every American generation must fight to defend democracy, respect the immense sacrifices paid by our ancestors to secure our freedom. How can we do less? We owe it to our ancestors to defend what they gave their lives for.